WXYZ, Detroit. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 20 years after he was shot. Where were you when you heard this?
We interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin from ABC Radio. Here is a special bulletin from Dallas, Texas. 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas, Texas.
Where were you? What were you doing, Pete?
I was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange as a runner, and I didn't know what had happened except that all the brokers were running around screaming and yelling, and the enunciator board, which is a tremendous board which signals the brokers to let them know that they're wanted by their particular brokerage houses, had just lit up completely.
And the market dropped 30 points or something.
Oh, it went absolutely crazy. What I remember most is we got to go home early that day, which was terrific.
What did you think about on the way home?
Absolute devastation. I could not believe it. I was 19 years old. The Vietnam War was on, and I thought, my God almighty, I'm going to go tomorrow. As it turned out, I went within 6 months.
Welcome home. Thank you, Pete, for sharing that.
Thank you.
David, what about you? Where were you? What were you doing?
I was in my geography class, and I was 14 years old, and the announcement came over the loudspeaker at first. Everyone immediately broke into tears. As we walked home that afternoon, as kids will do in a group, there was no playing, there was no much talking at all, just everyone kind of walked home in silence.
Do you remember how you spent the rest of the day?
Yeah, I came home and I was glued to the television set. And it was just
unreal.
Huh?
It was unreal.
It really was unreal, even for a 14-year-old who probably didn't have a total grasp of what this meant. And I don't know, it seems to me that if that was the unraveling of our country, then when his brother was assassinated, that was the final coup for me.
I remember driving home from the studios, and when Robert Kennedy was shot, and I remember what went through my mind, Robert Kennedy.
Yes.
I remember when I kept saying, I burst into the house and I said to my wife, those bastards have done it again.
Yeah.
I didn't know who they were, but that was what was going through my mind over and over again.
And I wanted to leave the country, but then I just said, well, now what is that going to prove, you know?
Thanks for sharing that, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Robert, you're on Talk Radio. I'm Michael Jackson. Where were you when you heard?
Yes, Michael. I was in 3rd grade. I was on the playground eating my lunch, and I remember the kids running around yelling, "The president's been shot. The president's been shot." And at the time, I don't think I really understood everything, but I felt very scared. And I remember seeing all the teachers crying, and, to me that was very new, watching a teacher cry.
As you now know, you're then obviously a man in your late 20s.
Yeah, I'm 28 years old.
Was he a great man, good man?
I consider President Kennedy the first real leader in my lifetime, and now I consider President Reagan the only other leader in my lifetime.
Fascinating. Politically poles apart, same dreams, same goals, same aspirations. Thank you for sharing that.
And thank you.
We'll continue. I'm Michael Jackson. This is Talk Radio. I'm Michael Jackson. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Where were you?
Rockwell in Southern California.
What were you doing?
I was in the logistics department. I was the cataloger.
And what happened, and how did you hear?
Well, it came over, they announced that Kennedy had been shot over the loudspeaker throughout the whole building. We were working on the Apollo program, the moon program.
Yeah. Do you remember how you reacted to it?
I just stopped in my tracks and looked at everyone in the office, and we all just looked at each other and just couldn't believe what we were hearing.
Alex, how old were you and where were you?
Michael, I was 5 years old. I was in Mission Hills, California, and I had my family had just come over from South America, Colombia, as a matter of fact. My father was a black Latin American, and so we had felt a real kinship toward Kennedy at that time. It had been developing. And in fact, even though I was small, I remember distinctly my mother was helping me with some books on reading. I was learning how to read at the time. And my dad rushed in with a look that I'd never seen on his face, and he said, "They have killed the president." And we turned on the television, and there was one image that I will never forget. I'm only 25 years old, and it was the scene at the hospital, the cameras outside the hospital. And you've got to understand that as a family, we were just becoming, we were just starting to really believe in the American dream. My father had come over. We had some means in South America, but he was working on his PhD, and we had our own home, and we were just starting to believe in all these things. And that followed with Robert's killing and then Martin Luther King's. I'm getting all emotional about it, even though I was only 5 years old, but I remember that very clearly.
I was at work, working on the switchboard as a relief operator while people were out to lunch.
In Pittsburgh then, too?
In Pittsburgh, right. And my mother called me on the switchboard to tell me that Kennedy had died. And I was just devastated. But what makes it worse, she died shortly after. And, when you mentioned that hour that happened today, it brought this all back, her voice, coming to me, telling me this. And it was doubly sad for me.
I'm sure, Ruth. Thank you very much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I'm Michael Jackson. This is News Talk Radio, AM 1270, WXYZ. Yes, Rod, where were you?
I was at Paris Island. I was,
Boot camp?
Boot camp.
Marine?
Marine.
Oh.
I was just a few days away from graduation from boot camp, and our platoon with others was on the parade ground rehearsing for what's called the final field, which is really the final inspection. And we were standing at parade rest, and announcement came over the loudspeaker. Our Commander-in-Chief, President Kennedy, has been shot and killed in Dallas. Security of barracks. There was nothing like it because from the time I was 16 when he was running for office and elected, I mean, he was my man. And, he still is. Our tragedy, in addition to the assassination itself, is we were not allowed to read newspapers at any time, including that time. We had no TV, we had no radio, no magazines, nothing. All we knew is what we were told. And I remember our drill instructor, our main drill instructor, Staff Sergeant McFadden, he had tears in his eyes. He wasn't crying because he wouldn't be allowed to do that. He was, a Marine like the rest of us. But he was sad, and he would report to us daily the changing events and what was happening. But it was, to me, it's still unfinished business because I wasn't there. I was there and I wasn't there.
Gene, you're on Talk Radio. I'm Michael Jackson. Hello.
Yeah, you're right. It does remind me of yesterday.
Where were you?
I was in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Yeah. Doing what?
I had gotten kicked out of school. The man said be concise, so I will. I was a new father, a senior in high school.
Wow.
And I was on my way back home.
On a bus?
On the bus, on the city bus. And evidently the bus driver had heard something, because he stopped just about a block and a half before my stop, and he cried. And he turned his radio on so that everyone could hear it. And it didn't hit me until I was living at my mother's house at the time. And it didn't really hit me until I went home, and she was in the kitchen, and she was crying. It saddened me. It still does.
Let's see if we can add a different note, though. Thank you very much for that.
Well,
thank you for sharing it. A different note. Evelyn Lincoln was secretary to John F. Kennedy. Miss Lincoln, you've heard what's been going on here. What do you think of when you think of the time that you spent with President Kennedy?
Well, I think of the very fortunate time I had to be associated with them. I think it was one of the most exciting periods of my whole life. And what he brought to the American people. I think he was an outstanding man, and there are 30 million people living today who were not old enough or even born 20 years ago who knew nothing of that era. And I feel very sorry that they were not able to live during that time.
Well, let's imagine I'm one of them for a moment. What did I miss? What manner of man, what did he bring to the United States?
Well, what he brought to the United States was that he tried to keep everyone. He tried to do the very best that he could, and he vitalized. He brought to the American people the hope for a better world, whereby we could live in peace, not peace by strength, but peace by words and negotiation. He brought an infectious vitality to government and politics. He also made people feel that each one of them had an important role in life. And his greatest legacy was the inspiration he gave to the youth to strive for excellence and have a part in the zeal for achievement.
Hard worker?
very much. He was a very demanding boss. He spoke rapidly and to the point. He knew exactly what he wanted, expected you to get what he said the first time, and to do it as soon as possible. Also, to do the best of your ability. He had a temper, but after he had blown up, he had forgotten all about it in a very short time.
What do you feel, upon reflection, was or is his major contribution, aside from inspiration?
Well, I think the fact that he was such an honest man and that he tried to do everything by reason and negotiation. He tried to compromise and also he tried to bring about the best for everyone, that there were equal rights for everyone. He did change, and in so doing, he hurt many people's ideas, and therefore they didn't like him. And they went against him for that one reason, because people like status quo. They don't like change. But he did, and he wanted to help every individual to have equality in this world.
Where were you when he was killed?
I was in Dallas.
God, what did you do?
What did I do? Well, what did you do when a big building falls on you, and all of a sudden your whole life is gone? Everything that you've been working for is just in a fraction of 2-3 minutes, it disappears. It's a traumatic feeling. I'll tell you that.
Do you think of yourself, or do you think of, or can you put it that way? Do you pain for the Kennedys, or honestly, do you think first of your own plight?
Oh, I don't think so. I think you think of yourself naturally. But no, I think, what I really think is that I feel sorry for the American people to have lost a man who was so dedicated and who was devoted to do the right thing for everyone. I think they really lost when he was assassinated.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you for being part of our remembering.
Thank you.
Good day, ma'am. The personal secretary to the late John F. Kennedy, Evelyn Lincoln. I'm Michael Jackson. Where were you, Diane?
Well, Michael, I was at school in Canada.
Uh-huh.
I was in 8th grade, and one of the girls had taken some papers to the office, and she came just across the hall, and she came running back to the room, and the principal had the radio on, and the CBC had picked it up, and they had, broken in and read the news on the air, and she came running back across the hall, and she said, President Kennedy has been killed. And, we just stopped. It was just unbelievable. We could not believe it.
Appreciate your sharing that. Thank you very much indeed. Richard, how about you?
Well, it was a heck of a day, I'll tell you. Michael, I was in my first job. I was 19 years old.
What were you doing?
I worked as a parts person for a Cadillac concern, and I went upstairs where the guys used to polish the Cadillacs every day, and I used to sit in the Cadillac and have lunch. Yeah. And this one particular day, I turned the radio on, and it sounded like broadcasts of assassination of somebody like McKinley or somebody years ago. They were dramatizing it, and I started listening to it thinking it was very amusing at first.
Yeah.
And then it hit that it wasn't something from the past, it wasn't an assassination from the past, but this actually was happening in Dallas, because I knew the president was going to be there. And I'll tell you, the whole place, it was a place where about 40 people worked. It was a small concern, and everybody just gathered around downstairs. The whole place shut down. Every business in the city shut down. When I went home, we went home early that day, and everybody, the streets were empty. It was really, you knew that a great man was taken from us.
And of course, just as it gradually dawned on you, so it only gradually dawned on the news media.
We interrupt this program for another bulletin from ABC Radio. More on the shots fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. No casualties have been reported in the first bulletin. However, there is a later bulletin that says there is perhaps a serious injury.
Michael, I was in 4th grade.
Where?
Where?
Yeah.
In a Catholic school in Milwaukee.
What did they tell you about it?
Well, Initially, it came over the loudspeaker that there had been a shooting, and we didn't know for sure what had happened, and there was almost a false hope that maybe he wasn't hit, maybe there was no problem at all.
Did they send you home?
No, we didn't go home, but the final word did come through over loudspeaker, and when it did, the nun openly wept before it. And when I got home, I found my mother standing by the window with tears coming down her eyes, and for several days after that, she sobbed considerably. It was a very profound and traumatic event in my life, and I'll never forget it.
It's the first time I think that many kids saw their parents crying. Never thought of it that way, but it is true.
You're right. I didn't realize the impact that the assassination of the president had, especially President Kennedy, who, of course, fought considerably a battle against his religious beliefs. So it made an impression, Michael. Very deep one.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing that.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. I'm Michael Jackson. Lana, where were you when it happened 20 years ago?
I was in New York City, my hometown. I was 21 years old. I was watching television with my mother and my brother when the news came over that he was shot, and then shortly after that he was dead. I remember needing to get out of the house and see people, see the reactions, share my grief with somebody. I remember going down the elevator of the apartment building and going out into the streets of Manhattan, and the first person I saw was a big, burly New York cop with tears streaming down his face. And we looked at each other, and I went over to him and I took his hands, and we just stared at each other for a couple of minutes and shared our moment of grief, and it made quite an impact on me. I remember turning around, and there were more people crying on the streets, just openly crying. And I remember that entire week afterwards, if people weren't crowded around the television set, if they were out, for instance, in a restaurant somewhere, you could hear a pin drop. People were so reverent and quiet. It was a time of great sadness, and I will never forget it.
Thank you for sharing that, Lana.
Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Jane?
I was at home. I was expecting my first child, so I had quit work. And I was watching a soap, and, the bulletin came on. I thought, good Lord, what are they going to do, mess up my soap opera, And then they came on and said that the president had been shot. So I immediately got up and called my husband, who was at work. And he said, he couldn't believe it. And he said, as soon as I hung up, all the phones in the office started ringing.
Funny, I was watching television, too.
That's what I wanted to know. What were you doing?
You want to know?
Yeah.
Well, I got up to watch myself in an NBC television show called Your First Impression. I was on the panel. The show never came on.
Oh, did it ever come on?
Oh, I hope not. Thanks for sharing that.
You're in touch with so much radio. WYZ.
From ABC News, I'm Bob Walker. I believe that those who seek peace and justice, those who join the forward march of the human pilgrimage on earth, will say of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he has never left us, and he never will.
Senator Edward Kennedy delivering a tribute to his brother at a special mass at the Holy Trinity Church in Washington on this, the 20th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. President Reagan and hundreds of other mourners attended. A special memorial service was also held today in Boston, and ABC's Pat Romano was there.
Here at the John Fitzgerald Kennedy Presidential Library in Boston on this November 22nd, the 35th President of the United States, a native son of Massachusetts, being remembered in a special way. A concert by the Harvard University Choir and Orchestra. President Kennedy, who called Harvard his alma mater, hoped one day to have his presidential library located near Harvard University in Cambridge. However, over the years, because of a number of problems, it was eventually built here along the waters of Dorchester Bay, next to the Boston campus of the University of Massachusetts. Pat Romano, ABC News, Boston.